Hey everybody. All right, so I confess I'm a little behind on the grading. As you've probably noticed, I have one of my kids needed to have surgery last weekend, and it's a whole it was a whole fiasco. I had surgery yesterday, so because of my need to take care of him, and also because we agreed that 30 minutes is kind of the most ideal length for a lecture video. That's the goal today. But I do want to review kind of the announcement that I sent out yesterday, and I also want to review like what the expectation is with the module this week. And then we will go from there. Okay. So I just want to I just want to remind you, guess what? It's like only 2 weeks till spring break. I wonder if you are as excited as I am. I think it's just nice to like have a little bit of a countdown to spring. But that's partly because I struggle a little bit when it's winter time. So, or a lot bit actually. I don't know how it is for you guys, but we are on week 8. So we've taken chapter 5 and divided it into two different things. And the reason I did that is because these theories are pretty comprehensive, and they could each be their own week. So we did touch on some of them at the beginning of the semester to kind of create a framework. And now we're going to go into more depth and introduce a couple of other theories as well. So hopefully these are helpful though. Like when you did your feedback on how helpful a theory is, you can kind of keep that in the back of your mind that it's helpful and educational, but sometimes not the most practical information. But hopefully it can help you make meaning out of what is practical. Okay. So if you look at the overview and objectives, I actually want to go over the quote. This quote I actually pulled from another location this week instead of pulling it from the textbook. And I want to kind of talk about this because I think it's super, super important in connection to these theories that we're going to be going over. So connection, no matter where that connection comes from, but we're going to say in this context, family communication connection is the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. When they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. I just love that. I think it's so beautiful. And I think that the purpose of all of these theories, the core purpose for them is actually to encourage connection so that the people in our families can feel seen and heard and valued, and that they can be received without judgment, but also that we can receive ourselves in the family system without judgment either, acknowledging that there are pressures that come from being in a family system. So that's kind of the point I wanted to start on with this lecture. You will, of course, be reading half. There will be discussion just like in the past. Most everything else is basically the same. The one other thing I want to bring to your attention in the module, though, is something that is coming up. So you're going to have an assignment that's going to be due on week 10. So that's in about 2 weeks. And that assignment is going to be an interviewing project where you are going to be interviewing 3 people about family. Okay. So I've given you a basic framework here in this category called looking ahead. So this assignment is going to be worth 100 points. It's one of the bigger sections of the assignment. The purpose of this is to kind of investigate how different generations perceive family and how families should work together. Okay, so your final paper should be about 3 pages or 1,000 words. And of course, it should be APA. It'll be due on March 30th, so it'll be due after spring break. I wanted to give you time to be able to interview these 3 people. Okay, so here's some example prompts that to help you write questions on what to ask. So again, the purpose of this is to kind of understand understand how different generations in your family systems, or if you've chosen to use fictional family systems, how different generations might respond to these kinds of prompts or questions. We find that generations do very much affect the way we see the world when we're born, how we grow up. And interestingly enough, those generations are cyclical. So if you would like some reference points on this, I'll include this next time. But the fourth turning is here is one example. And then Jean Twenge just released a book last year called Generations that is specifically about these generational shifts. So that's our goal here with this assignment. Now remember, it's week 10. It's March 30th. So you basically have a month until this is due, but kind of settling on what questions you're going to ask, which is what an interview protocol means. And then scheduling 3 people and then kind of going through all the data of their answers and then writing and submitting your paper is going to take some time. So I just want to kind of start orienting you toward that project while we still have time. Okay, so let's start looking at the theories for this week. So I'm going to week 8, the PowerPoint, and again, this is the second half of chapter 5. So I will just be moving through this for the rest of our recording. And of course, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to send me an email and ask ask those questions. I'm happy to answer them both in video or in text. Okay. So if you are confused about the next interview project, I will go into more details next week. The purpose of this week is just to kind of start you thinking about this coming. So it's a priming. If you look at psychology, if you don't know what that means, it just means like you're kind of getting your brain flow headed in that direction, even though it's not a direction you need to head in this exact moment. Okay. All right, so let's look at these theories. So we're going to be talking about the dialectical approach. This is my particular area of expertise, attachment theory. This particular theory has gained so much popularity, and I think it's because it makes people feel seen and heard, kind of like that quote from Brené Brown that we were just talking about. It's very, very easy to find content about attachment theory on social media right now because it provides people context for their experiences. Social exchange theory is a little different, and circumplex theory or circumplex model is also unique. Those are not things that you're going to be able to find a ton of content about, but they can really provide additional context to why people do the things that they do. And as far as circumplex model goes, to understand what a healthy family system looks like. Okay, so let's start with dialectics. So I want to bring your attention first to this image in the bottom corner of this individual looking 2 directions. You can see that in one of the faces has one kind of, concern on one face and then happiness on the other face. And the purpose, this is actually a Greek god called Janus. I've heard it pronounced many different ways. And basically, dialectical theory was pulled from this analogy of this Greek god. Basically, this god, Janus, is looking to the past and the future simultaneously. And I think it's really important to understand where this comes from because it helps contextualize why we look at dialectical tensions in pairs. What we're doing is we're creating a spectrum of these opposites, though they're not always exactly opposite in the way that we might think of an opposite. They're usually more opposite in concept or feeling or emotion. So just be mindful of that as we go through these, that the purpose is and the reality is that all of this is going to exist at the same time. And our goal here is to try to figure out how to manage the situation with all of this simultaneously present in our lives. Dialectical approach speaks to the complexity that we deal with when we're in relationship with others, no matter what the context of that relationship might be. Okay, so back to the definition. Dialectics posits that family life is characterized by ongoing tensions between contradictory impulses. Okay, so when Baxter and Montgomery, although I don't know, there was a whole communication discipline drama about who created this theory. So lately it's just been Baxter. I don't know. That's neither here nor there. But when they created this, started publishing articles about this in I just believe it was the late 80s, the early 90s. These were the three primary dialectical tensions that they noticed in family life. Dialectical approach is so comprehensive. There are many, many tensions for many, many different types of relationships. And it would be literally impossible to list them all here in a 30-minute lecture. I think these are the most important ones. And so we're going to use these as a type of framework to explain what happens in family life. But know that if you're a stepchild, or if you have stepchildren or something along those lines, there are actually different types of tensions that are introduced. Or if you're living with someone but you're not married to them, there's a different type of tension that is going to be created in that scenario. So just be mindful that different contexts introduce different tensions. Okay, so autonomy and connection versus openness, autonomy versus openness. Oh, my land. Autonomy versus connection. So basically another way to look at this is being independent versus interdependent. Okay, so that's one way to look at that one. Openness versus protection. This is about disclosure specifically. So what do I share and what do I keep to myself? And then the last one, novelty and predictability. In almost all relationships, but particularly partnered relationships, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouses, partners, whatever the case might be, we often want some consistency. That's the predictability piece of this. But we also want something new because it makes things exciting. That's part of what makes dating so fun, is that there's novelty. But if things become too predictable, the relationship can suffer. But if things are so novel all the time that it's overwhelming, that can also negatively affect the relationship. So those are the basics of family life and what we're looking at here. Okay. So once it was understood that we're all simultaneously being pulled in many different directions to try to maintain our relationships, we engage in certain patterns of behavior to manage the tensions that we feel. So there are three here: cyclical alteration, segmentation, and selection. And then finally integration, which has a subset. Cyclical alteration is where sometimes you're open. So if we go back up here, let's choose openness and protection. Okay. So with cyclical alteration, you would go, sometimes you're open and sometimes you're closed. Segmentation is where you're a little bit open and you're a little bit closed. Okay, so if you think of it again, excuse me, as a spectrum, if you kind of see this dial moving up and down the spectrum from one end to the other, segmentation basically says, oh, there are actually two dials and we're going to move them both toward and include both. So in openness, Excuse me, sorry. In openness and protection, we might say, actually, we're going to move those two dials. We're going to split the dial in half and move one a little bit toward protection, one a little bit toward openness, and try to include that in our lives. Selection means you just like choose one. You like, okay, you're my spouse. I'm just going to choose to be 100% open with you. So I'm just going to choose openness, and I'm going to not worried about protection, right? I've already gone through the process to determine that you're safe enough for me to just choose one direction. Integration is an opportunity to kind of internalize and accept that you're in this place where you're being pulled in different directions. And it allows you the opportunity to maybe even reframe, to neutralize, to disqualify. It basically says, you know what, I'm going to take the fact that there's this spectrum that pulls me in two opposite directions, and I'm going to reframe it enough that it doesn't pull me in either direction. So that when we're looking at integration, those are the strategies that we're looking at. Of course, there's more information in your textbook about this. I would say the bulk of the theory section of the chapter is about dialectical approach. So I'm just going to let you read that and kind of mull on it there, because we've got other stuff we need to get to. Okay. Yeah. So I'll go through these slides really quickly so that we can get to attachment theory, again, with this expectation that you're going to focus on what is in the textbook. Okay. So people in relationships are always making meanings that are wrought from the struggle of the competing discourse. For example, closeness and independence. Okay. So that one was connection up at the top. It's the same one as autonomy and connection. It's the same thing. Okay. So there's different types of thinking that can happen when we approach these. Dialectical approach is a very well-developed theory, so that's why there's so much here. Monologic thinking suggests that closeness is viewed as a linear continuum, and it privileges harmony and positive affect in family life. So monologic is like, we're going to kind of focus on this idea of closeness as the priority in the division. Dualistic thinking recognizes differentiation in close relationship and does not espouse linear thinking. So this is, I don't know if you've heard the saying, it is neither good nor bad, it just is. That is a perfect reflection of dualistic thinking. Dialectic thinking focuses on the complex nature of separateness and connectedness in the family as simultaneously operating in family relationships. So for me personally, as a mother, each one of my children, I'm experiencing this with all the time. And I'm also experiencing this with my spouse. I additionally am experiencing this with my own parents and my siblings and their spouses or partners. And so there's a lot going on there. And the purpose of dialectic thinking is to just acknowledge that this is an incredibly complex situation when we're dealing with family relationships. Okay, so again, because they're ongoing parts of relational life, they need to be managed. And these are those management suggestions that we went over earlier in the previous slide. So hopefully dialectical approach kind of gives you a chance to see, like, when you feel overwhelmed in a situation or you feel overwhelmed in a family life, there's a reason. It's not like you being dramatic. It's because you are literally being pulled by different loyalties in different directions. So it's okay to just acknowledge that it is a complex experience to be in relation with other people. Another place we see this is in the workplace. That's where my area of expertise is where dialectical thinking occurs in the office or on the job, because it applies there as well. So hopefully that kind of gives you a chance to kind of be like, to affirm yourself and acknowledge that, like, actually being in relationship with others is crazy. Okay, attachment theory is a very, very beautiful theory. It happens in early childhood. That's a quiz question, by the way. At least how you develop your attachment theory happens in early childhood. And then it affects the rest of your life. So it's really important to understand what your personal attachment style is, because it will affect how you connect with your spouse. It will affect how you connect with your children. And it is already affecting how you connect with your parents and your siblings. Okay, so let's define this. An attachment style is based on the responsiveness of the caregiver when you are an infant to preschool age. Okay, by the time you enter kindergarten, first grade, your attachment style is well solidified. And then you get the opportunity to deal with that for the rest of your life. You can change it, and it takes a lot of work, but it is possible. So just also, that should be mentioned as well. The quality of the first love relationship is critical. So that first love is that caregiver love. It's critical in establishing a pattern for the infant's future attachments. So typology of relationships between child and caregiver. These are the different types. There's an additional one on here that I will mention, but it's not in the textbook. So I'll mention it, but it's not something that you need to be worried about. Although if this is something of interest to you, you might be able to find, you will find content on social media about it. Okay, so we can have a secure attachment. This is where a caregiver is responsive and the infant is confident that the caregiver will respond to them in their need. If a baby cries, the caregiver responds. Okay. If the baby needs their diaper changed, the caregiver changes the diaper. Like, it is the caregiver being deeply consistent with the child or the infant. Okay, anxious ambivalent is what it results in is a temperamental infant because there's inconsistent caregiving. So, and please don't take offense at this, particularly if you have your own children. Maybe you read a new strategy of like getting your baby to sleep, and the strategy is you're supposed to let them cry, and you let them cry themselves to sleep. But previous to that, you had been responding to them within 10 minutes of them starting to cry. That inconsistency, that shift creates a temperamental and anxious child. That's super, super important to understand, particularly if you haven't had children yet. Avoidant is usually extreme situations, but this is when there's an undemonstrative infant. What that means is the infant is flatline and the caregiver is flatline. So this is when the caregiver's personal wants, I'm not going to say needs, but like wants, supersede the legitimate needs of the infant. So I'm not saying like, I don't know, when you have babies, this will make sense. And if you have had them, I'm not saying like, okay, this baby is crying, but you really need to go to the bathroom. And so you choose to go to the bathroom. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about situations more like this. This is an actual life experience that I had. I woke up one night at 1 a.m. I could hear a baby crying. And it was very strange because my kids were like kindergarten and older. So they were like from ages 5 to 10. And so I was like, weird that this baby's cry would wake me up. but it didn't go away. So I went outside because I could hear it from outside of our house. Long story short, I found a 2-year-old outside at 1 a.m. in the morning crying on the porch. The caregiver and their boyfriend had set the baby outside so the baby wouldn't be exposed to the smoke and drugs that they were doing. So I took the baby. I came and got a blanket. I held the baby for a while. We called the police. We ended up knocking on the door. It was quite the drama. I do not know what happened after that. I never saw the child outside ever, ever, ever again, which also unnerved me a little bit. But there's not a lot I can do about that. It also was not in this country. So, so as an immigrant, there was even less I could do about it. That is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about an avoidant attachment style. It's where the caregivers, that was a need. That was a need that the child had, but a want that the caregiver had, and the caregiver put their wants above the need of the child. So that's what creates an avoidant attachment style. Places where you might see this, that's kind of an extreme example, but I find that, and again, this is not intended to be a critical statement, just a fact. Individuals where there are large families with a large number of children, it can be very difficult to meet all those little people's needs when they need them, because often there are many needs happening simultaneously. And what that leads to is an anxious or avoidant attachment style, because the child doesn't know if their needs will ever be met. The final attachment style that's not listed here is a mixed attachment style, and it is the worst of all. It's more of a chaotic attachment style. That attachment style is an anxious avoidant attachment style. So as you can imagine, an anxious avoidant attachment style is kind of a mess. I'm sure you can draw your own conclusions. And if you're interested, of course, you can do your own research as well. Okay. Here's what this ends up looking like in adulthood. This ends up looking like a secure person is comfortable with both autonomy and intimacy, or connectedness. An individual can be preoccupied with intimacy or dismiss intimacy or fearful of intimacy if they come into this place where they're anxious, ambivalent, avoidant, or they have that mixed anxious avoidant attachment style. So these last three, preoccupied, dismissing, and fearful, require a lot of work to make a relationship healthy. It's super possible. It's totally possible. It's important that you just understand that that is the reality. But when we understand it, we can create more connection. Just like that Brené Brown quote, we can help each other feel seen, valued, and heard because we understand that these different attachment styles exist. All right, social exchange theory. This is a video. I would like to invite you to go look at this video in the PowerPoint. So it's embedded there. This will help you understand social exchange theory very clearly. Dr. Lyon does a great job explaining this. So I'm actually going to skip this because we're almost to 30 minutes. I want to respect our agreement. The most important thing is to understand that social exchange theory looks at relationships as if they were an economic scenario, and where there is an actual equation where costs and rewards provide value or the worth of the relationship. Dr. Lyon will explain it more. You're going to definitely want to look at that. I want to hit circumplex model because we're running out of time, but also it's really unique. It's a really unique model. I was not exposed to this until just not long ago. And so I think I guess maybe I'm excited about it because it's a newer point of learning for me. The circumplex model posits that family life is conducted along two crucial dimensions. Adaptability. Okay, so when the family is under stress, do they recalibrate very well? And cohesion. So this refers to the degree of emotional connection with family experiences. So what happens then is that, and I found this out of the actual research paper that produced this theory, okay, that basically introduced it to academia as a whole. The model that is inside the textbook is a little bit different. I liked this one a little bit better, but either one. I wanted to expose you to both so you could see whichever one would make sense to you. The thing I want to bring to your attention, circumplexity takes the cohesion, okay, low, high, flexibility, high and low, and it plot points characteristics in the family system on this chart. And what that does is it basically says, hey, you know what? There are family connected, like there are family styles that are going to be balanced and create a healthy family system. And there are family styles that are going to create a deep imbalance and an unhealthy family system. So if you look at this particular chart, and you'll see the same thing in your textbook, balanced family connections are here in the center. Note how they don't all look exactly the same. You can have different systems and they can be balanced. As you go out to these edges, then we get kind of a mid-range, not the most balanced, but doable, manageable, right? And then these black ones are deeply imbalanced. It's deeply chaotic. Usually this is where, when we start to get to this rim and toward these ranges, this is where we start to see mental, just psychological abuse and verbal abuse as a whole. Not to mention, sometimes physical abuse as well and neglect. So circumplex model is just so cool. I think for this class, if I were to encourage you to really explore any of the models, it would be circumplex models. But you have an assignment. One of your discussions is to pick one of the theories and to kind of do a deep dive into that theory and learn a little bit more. So you are welcome to explore any of these four. And if you have learned, I'm just going to go back to like social exchange theory. If you have learned a different model, you are welcome to also include that in the discussion. So maybe you have learned about MMC, which is basically a communication model that says that we have scripts in our relationships, and when someone doesn't follow the script, it becomes very alarming. So if you've learned another theory that we could apply to family communication, you're also welcome to choose one of those. All right, my friends, that is our lecture for this week. I hope that you have a beautiful week and that this helps provide some clarity for the PowerPoint. Please go watch this video, and I'll be checking in.